proper use, its sheeting action leaves glasses virtually spotless. That Cascade moment of truth.
What a shine! Now that's more like it.
For virtually spotless dishes, use Cascade as directed and make that moment of truth your moment of glory.
Hey, Cascade, that's beautiful.
Did you promise yourself a new car this year? Well, do it now. Lansdowne Pontiac is closing its lot on number 3 Road in Richmond, and inventory must be reduced. 81 Acadians like this 4-door automatic demo from $59.85. This beautiful 1981 Grand Prix with small V8 bucket seats, fully equipped, is only $89.99. Now you can get the popular Phoenix with 6-cylinder and automatic for just $79.97. Take advantage of Lansdowne Pontiac's number 3 Road lot closure. See the great selection of cars at 7811 Alderbridge Way and the trucks at number 3 Road Richmond. Act now.
Coming up next, Webster.
Bill Kunstler is the famous or notorious American radical lawyer who's been involved in every major civil rights battle in the United States since the 60s. Defended the men accused of killing the FBI agents at Pine Ridge. Defended Martin Luther King, was involved in all the busing, the food counter troubles, and was one of the negotiators at Attica Jail in New York when more than 40 guys were killed by the attack of the authorities. He's here this morning. Also with him, not with him, but also on the program is Ron Derrickson, who might be described as the chief of the Westbank Indian Band, who is involved in a battle with some of his band supporters because of the money he's making for the band. We'll see what Derrickson has to say this morning to us. And as well as Brian Smith, Education Minister of the province of British Columbia, who is in the eye of the middle class revolt and the general storm over the unhappiness of the methods used by the social credit government still to finance education in British Columbia. Everyone, it seems, on the Lower Mainland is screaming and shouting about their basic assessments. What does Mr. Smith plan to recommend to the Cabinet, if he can do anything this year at all? After the break. Never has there been such a storm in British Columbia about property assessments. Or perhaps I should qualify that. Such a storm in the Lower Mainland, where the ammunition and the jealousies are pouring out, that 44 of the school boards, 70-some school boards in British Columbia, their education costs are covered by homeowner grants. But down in the Lower Mainland, where the prices peaked and then fell, people are horrified by the increases in their assessments on which they pay their property taxes. Mr. Brian Smith is, the Honourable Brian Smith is the Education Minister. You really ran right into a middle-class revolt on this occasion, did you not, Mr. Smith?
Well, I think people are right to be concerned about their assessment increases, Jack. Overall, across the province this year, they're up about 30%. And most people can't remember how their property values went way up in the early part of 1981 and yet trailed down in the latter part of 1981, and why the net increase the assessor has given them is that high.
Oh, well, they can understand it because the market price was high and then came the recession and the slump. Yeah. So many people's houses are obviously overvalued and will be gouged on the mill rate. Take Vancouver and West Vancouver, for instance, where I understand that the net profit will go to you. $1 million odd in West Van, 11 odd million in the city of Vancouver. Is that not correct?
It's only true for a part of the education budget, which is called the basic program fund for schools, but it's not true overall. For instance, Vancouver doesn't ship education money back to the province overall. The province pays the cost of all the teachers' pensions. The province pays for homeowners' grants. The province contributes to capital and to other items. And that's all to do with schools. I'm not talking about colleges and universities where the province pays the whole shot.
But doesn't the situation this year indicate quite clearly that we have an unjust method of collecting educational taxes in the question of equity throughout the province? Why should somebody with a $75,000 house in somewhere up country have a net nothing to pay in school taxes, but somebody down here with the same house is paying taxes?
Well, it would depend on the assessed value of the house in either place as to whether or not they paid tax. But the basis of equalization that the formula started with was that school districts that didn't have a large industrial base, rural school districts and suburban school districts that had no industrial base, couldn't raise a heavy tax levy, that their students would get the same quality education that the students would in places like Vancouver and Victoria. And it worked very well, Jack, until we had this wildly escalating increase in property values in the past couple of years. And that has, I think, pointed out problems with the education formula that have to be changed. Now, there are things that government can and has done on a sort of temporary basis to make that easier. One thing that we have done the last 2 years is to continue to reduce the percentage of residential value that's taxed. You pay tax now this year on 10% of the value of your house.
It was to be 11%, and you brought it down to 10.
We brought it down. It was 14.5 the year before. So we've moved it down fairly sharply. So in Vancouver, the average house in Vancouver on the assessment rolls has gone up. I'm talking about houses, not commercial property overall.
No, they're separate.
The average house has gone up between 16 and 18% in assessment. But you see the average increase in the taxable value will only have gone up about 6% because of that reduction from 11 to 10.
I understand that, but is it not basically an unsound system where the assessments respond to the vagaries of a very ebullient market? And does it not undoubtedly give a fair measure of unjust weight on the people with ordinary houses on the lower mainland and in Surrey?
Well,
that's surely patently obvious.
Well, it penalizes people that live in highly assessed homes. They pay more schools tax than people who live in lower.
Highly assessed ordinary homes, the market price being so much greater down here than up there.
Well, another thing that we've done to recognize that is to introduce legislation in December which would allow the government to phase in assessment increases in one school district if they were much higher than in others. That would have helped us a lot in Vancouver last year. I don't think it'll help too much this year because you have a pretty uniform increase across the province. And a third thing that I'm doing is I'm proposing radical changes to the education finance formula.
For this year, no.
Well, I'm going to be bringing forward draft legislation. It won't affect the tax rolls this year.
It won't be in time for the tax rolls or education financing this year.
No, but it would certainly be in time for it next year. But a very, very drastic change, which would amount to this, that the province would actually set out a prescribed program of education which it would support from provincial funds. And it would support and pay for a basic program from provincial funds. The method of raising those funds, some of that would be general revenue, some of that would also be a property tax, but I would like to see it a property tax which was primarily or solely a commercial, industrial, non-resident property tax and not a homeowner's property tax.
What you're saying, therefore, is that you're moving towards the arguments that have been made for years that the provincial government, out of general revenue, wherever it gets the taxes, should pay a basic education cost for each separate school board in the province.
Yes,
but then the school board would be nicked with the additional frills it wanted to put on the top. Is that correct?
That's it exactly. The school board then could decide that It wanted to have more teachers than the provincial formula allowed, that it wanted to run some special programs, it wanted to add on new space and do all these things, and it would have to go to its local property taxpayers and justify that.
I mean, just justify it, or would it become a matter for which they were legally responsible in raising this separate tax?
They'd be legally responsible for raising the separate tax, and it would come off property.
But you are still suggesting that there would be a basic prescribed program for education throughout the province.
Yes.
And that the province would pay that money.
Yes.
We'll say 75% of the present costs or something. But you don't recommend that it all come from general revenue. You say,
well, there isn't that. There is. I don't know where in general revenue I'd get it to.
Well,
be
if
very,
you drop
very
the property,
blunt.
if you drop the school property assessment, you could levy another tax for it.
Well, where would
on everybody?
Where would it be levied? In order to get that kind of money, you're looking at $500 million. You would have to increase the sales tax by 2.5 points, or you would have to increase the personal income tax by 10% to get that kind of money.
I get the point, but this is your firm program, cabinet approved?
No, not cabinet approved. No, this is what I'm proposing.
For draft legislation.
Proposing, and I will be unveiling it either in a white paper or draft legislation this spring if I get cabinet approval.
Well, many people will regard that as quite a step forward.
It would be a very revolutionary step forward.
I think it would be accepted by many people. But what about this year? Now, even if the assessment officers say roll back a roll 10% in West Van or Vancouver or whatever all the streams are coming from, that doesn't help because you'll still have the inequities within the assessments.
Yes.
So what are you going to do this year to reduce the burden on those who have got highly assessed homes and very heavy school taxes?
Well, the only things that can be done this year are to use that new legislation if the assessments in the Lower Mainland were very out of kilter with the rest of the province, to have special grants to certain school districts, or to increase the homeowners grant. And you will not get any hint out of me, much as I would like to talk about it, as to whether or not there is going to be a homeowners grant increase. You'd have to wait for the budget address of the Minister of Finance to see whether or not there was. But I will say this, that one idea we put forward in our school tax reform report was to increase homeowners grants in a targeted way, that is not across the board, and to give those increases, not the old homeowners grant, the basic homeowners grant would stay, but to give the increase. Say you gave everyone a targeted homeowners grant increase of $50 a month, you would only get that if you were paying that amount of school tax. So it couldn't...
Not to exceed your school tax in the highly assessed area.
That's right. So
that would prevent the multimillionaires from getting the benefit, which they don't need.
Well, it also would prevent that money from spilling over to pay for municipal services.
Which it does in the interior at the moment.
Which it does in about 44 school districts. In other words, it would go to those districts that are over-assessed where the need is.
Not bad.
Yep.
More with Brian Smith, Minister of Education, after the break. I'm going to take some phone calls this segment. Just let me recap for a minute. The broad plan in the mind of the minister is that there might be draft legislation sometime this year for future years with a basic program financed out of provincial revenue, which is part general and part property and part commercial industrial taxation.
That's what I'd like to see.
Right? And then the school boards would have to raise the balance, and it would be perfectly visible what that school board was raising. For this year, he said, he's not promised anything, but there might be an increase in the homeowner grant specifically for application against the school costs in the highly assessed or over-assessed areas. I think he made a slip, though, and said of $50 a month.
No, I meant a $50 increase in the basic homeowners grant. That's
so
what I was talking
about. So $50.
And I just used that as a figure. It could go up any amount, but if it went up $50 a month on a targeted homeowners grant, $50 this year, you'd have to be actually paying $50 in gross school tax to get the benefit.
And it wouldn't be allowed to slop over to be applied against
No.
the general tax section of your tax bill.
That's right.
That's, I suppose, is a step in the right direction too. But how are you going to control the spendings of people like Vancouver School Board? Surely they're faced with the situation of dropping pupils. The pupil ratio is dropping like mad. What do you think of them?
Well, they're always very critical and the first to blame the province for not putting enough money into public schools in Vancouver. But I'm very surprised to see that their budget is up 18% this year, that they have dropped in pupils by something like 17 or 1,800, which is over 3%, and yet the number of teachers is not down, but is actually increased. They've hired an additional 30-odd teachers, and what they have really done is they have lowered the pupil-teacher ratio from just under 18 to just over 17. And they've also added to the per pupil cost in Vancouver about $600 per pupil. They've gone from about $2,700 per pupil cost in this district to over $3,300, and they're now above the provincial average in the per pupil cost, and they used to always be way below that because of their economies of scale. So,
are they profligate? Are they wasting money?
well, they're not addressing the fact that they're a declining enrollment district, and they're just merrily going ahead in a certain direction, and they should be looking to their budget and that part of their budget that they're responsible for, instead of always screaming that the province should come and bail them out. I'm aware of the province's responsibilities. I don't duck them. I don't say the financial formula is perfect. I try and deal with that and improve it. But all I hear from the majority of the Vancouver School Board...
You mean the COPE majority?
Yes.
That's what I'm talking about. After.
Well, I'm talking about the majority of the board, and all I hear from them is that the province is starving education in Vancouver, where the province supports post-secondary education in a massive way in Vancouver.
Well, no, you do. So therefore, they're trying to create a political axe against your throat by their own profligacy of spending.
Well, they're not addressing their own responsibilities.
Are they irresponsible? Is the Vancouver School Board irresponsible?
They're trying to pass the buck instead of looking to their own sharp pencil.
They are irresponsible, you say?
You said it, Jack.
But you certainly don't...
I'm a mild man.
But the only way you're going to get through to Philip Rankin and the people in the Vancouver School Board is to tell them bluntly.
No.
You're not going to carry the can for them. Is that correct?
Well, under a new financial formula, they would have to carry their own can totally.
What about West Vancouver, where we have incredible school costs, and I can't complain, my kids would school through. What do you feel about West Vancouver School Board's performance?
Well, West Vancouver's a hard... taxpayers are hard hit because their assessments are high and they don't have a commercial base that they can get their revenue from. Vancouver, you see, gets most of its school board revenue from commercial industrial. Only about 15% comes from...
I'm going to take a couple of calls because I had hoped to have you here for longer calls this morning, but due to the pressure of business, that dreadful man Kunstler's here, and Ron Derrickson. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good morning, Jack.
Yeah.
Good morning, Mr. Smith.
Good morning to you.
Did I understand you to say that the average household tax had gone up something like 16%?
No, what I said was that the average assessment of single-family homes in Vancouver is up this year between 16 and 18%.
Oh,
the
that's
assessment.
very interesting, because my taxes in 81, my land was assessed at 105,000, at 100,000. In 81, 198, and this year it's $407,950, which is an increase over 2 years of 304.71%.
Do you live in Shaughnessy?
Yes, I do.
And you went from 180 to 407?
That's right.
Well, that's...
Needless to say, I have appealed.
You are certainly not the average house.
Doesn't that demonstrate how unjust your basic taxation system is?
Well, you know, I wouldn't mind if I had increased gradually over the years and somebody could show me that I could walk off of this and get $407,000. But, you know, that's not probable.
That's a key call, I think.
I know how she feels.
Thank you, ma'am, and you've had what he's promised, perhaps.
One other point, if I may.
Yes.
25 years ago, Ray Perot was talking about changing the base of taxation in this province, so, you know, I'm not really holding my breath.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Jack?
Yes, quickly.
Ken Burlock, and I'm from Central Vancouver Island. I've been spearheading a Citizens Action Committee with a positive approach to this problem. It's based on small business and the permanent homeowners. And our initial objective is a petition we have that, the way it reads, we undersigned property owners object to the property tax assessment based on present market values. And we hereby petition the government of the province of British Columbia and the Assessment Authority of British Columbia to maintain property assessment values at the 1981 level until such time as a more equitable assessment procedure can be implemented.
Okay, that's a clear question. Do you have an answer for that? Would you go along with that?
No, I wouldn't, because it's the mill rates and the taxation level, and not the assessment. If the assessments are going to be frozen and held at a certain level, Jack, we'll just go back to where we were in the early 1970s, where the assessments are all over the lot and they're fudged and they're held back and depressed. And I think everyone agreed that they had to be accurate and true, but it's the taxation system that assessments are based on where the fault is.
Right. Hold on a second, please. You're certainly not going to change the present system or the present effect in the interior of British Columbia, because to do that and to levy them the economic cost of their education would create many political enemies, wouldn't it?
Well, that's not the reason why you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't do it because a lot of districts would not be able to collect within their own boundaries enough money to run proper schools.
I get the point.
You get two different qualities of education.
Go ahead, please.
Hello. I find that the assessment seems to be not that terrible bad in most cases, but in the industrial part, where most of our school taxes are coming from, the assessment hasn't gone up at all, and here now it's putting a far higher percentage of the tax on the residential section.
Is that correct, Mr. Smith?
No, it really isn't correct overall, sir, and it's certainly in Vancouver. The commercial and industrial tax pays for most of the Vancouver school budget. About 90 out of 140 million last year came from that base, and that base is up as well.
But it's not up as much as what the residential part is.
It is in percentage terms, sir. Maybe it isn't in some individual instances, but it certainly is in percentage terms. It's up higher over a 2-year period.
I don't want to get lost in... Caledon, go ahead, please.
Yeah, Mr. Webster, your chap there is talking, and you too also, and I hear on your news that in the interior here that the assessment and things haven't gone up, which isn't so.
No, but your homeowner grant generally balances at least your school costs.
Well, I'm not worried about the school costs. All I know is that our property on our lot has doubled, and our home has gone up another third.
Where is Caledon?
It's just south of Penticton. It's supposed to be rural land.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Smith, I'm sorry I can only give you this much time this morning because we can keep the phones going forever, but I would just want to recap just one little bit. Are you concerned about this middle-class revolt which has just exploded because of the false figures, not false, but the false figures on assessments due to the collapse of the real estate market?
Well, I'm concerned about people's feelings on assessments. I've heard many individual complaints in my own area about this. I know how concerned people are about assessments, but I repeat again, Jack, that assessment is supposed to tell the true value. It's the tax levies that are raised from that assessment and the system.
But you're the guy who sets the mill rate.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm wrongly assessed at $400,000, which I don't happen to be, it's your mill rate that screws me on taxes. It's not the cost of education. Is that not correct?
Well, it's both. The cost of education requires a certain mill rate. I reduced the mill rate, basic mill rate levy slightly this year. The provisional levy is down. I hope it'll be down again. It's not down a large amount, but I would also hope, Jack, that school boards and municipalities would be reducing their mill
Well,
rate.
let me go through that point. One, you have only set a provisional levy.
Yes.
You have yet to set a final levy.
Yes, that's set in March.
So you have an opportunity, it's presently 36 point something, is it?
No, it's 41.2 provisional.
Whatever it is, 41.2. You can therefore give relief to the homeowner if you wish throughout the province by either selectively or generally reducing that mill rate.
Could only be done generally. It couldn't be done selectively.
Could be done.
Yeah.
You can't change the system this year, but for this moment you're giving us a strong hint that there might well be an additional homeowner grant applicable only to school taxis in selected areas up to 50, you mentioned $50, where valuations have gone up and down. That's your proposition.
That is a distinct option that government has, and that would be announced if we were going to do that in the budget speech.
The only comfort for you politically in this is that the NDP, while they in power, would be in the same hassle precisely.
Much worse, Jack, because they'd have spent a lot more money.
My thanks to Brian Smith. When do we get the final tax rate for school purposes, mill rate?
That is announced at the end of March.
My thanks to Brian Smith. Next, William Kunstler, radical attorney from the United States, after the break. When William Kunstler, the famous attorney for the Chicago 7, comes to Canada, you know there's got to be trouble in the making. Political trouble in the making. I had a clipping in front of me from the McGill University student paper way back in 1971, when Bill Kunstler, who has been involved in every major civil rights and black fighting for freedom kerfuffle in the United States, when he stood up and he said, after a bit of a riot, the blacks had disrupted a meeting protesting the British in Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, he said, "Everyone has the right to speak," said Kunstler, "but others have the right to prevent him if they find his views intolerable." So here you are, Mr. Kunstler, at long last to get to meet you. If you don't agree with someone, you're going to shut them up.
Well, that isn't the context, Jack, in which that came out. The context,
you don't mind me twisting it?
No, listen, I've been twisted for years, so it doesn't matter. But the context in which it came out was a situation involving whether if you had a speaker, a former Nazi, speak to a group of Jews who had just had relatives murdered in concentration camps and began to urge genocide, concentration camps, gassing Jews, and they could not stop him legally, then they might, and they have the right certainly, they might take matters into their own hands. That's fundamental. That's the right of revolution in essence.
What right of revolution?
Well, there is a right of revolution in all people.
In any civilized country, you have laws, we certainly have in this country, whereby if a man is making subversive, treasonous, or genocide statements, he can be stopped instantly by the law. Surely you have that in the United States?
No, and I'm against that kind of a law anyway.
Oh, you are?
I think
you would allow the Ku Klux Klan to go around burning the crosses and all the rest of it?
Well, there may be laws against burning crosses on people's property, etc. But just speaking, talking, I don't think any law should stop that. I do say, though, that people have a right, if it reaches an intolerable situation, and they'll be violating the law, they'll be punished, no question about it, to take certain matters in their own hands. I represented two priests, the Philip and Daniel Berrigan, who burnt draft records in order to protest the war in Vietnam. Clearly illegal. I defended them. I thought the act was right. It dramatized the situation, but it's the same as stopping a speaker. It took matters into their own hands.
It's a question of reasonable balance in a civilized society, surely, because I'd go along with you that the truly loyal subject of the chief magistrate must neither advise nor consent to arbitrary measures.
Right, and I'm not sure what a civilized society is anymore, Jack. If you think the United States is a civilized society with the shooting down of third world people in our streets, with the war in Vietnam, with these types of situations, I don't know what the word civilized means.
Well, it's the best we've got at the moment, isn't it, broadly speaking?
Well, broadly speaking, I'd say yes, but the word civilized is what affronts me, because the United States lost 55,000 young men in Vietnam and probably caused over 1 million casualties of the Vietnamese in a war that was intolerable, immoral, made no sense whatsoever.
An imperialist war.
And
Stupid war.
And one which probably was more for the Chrysler Motor Corporation than it was for anything else. And is that the mark of a civilized society?
Well, you're telling shooting down third world people in the streets. Do you mean the Black Panthers being assassinated by the police? What are you talking about?
Well, I would include those, but I'm talking about the strangling of a black businessman in Brooklyn by 5 police officers.
Have they been dealt with?
No, they were acquitted. The acquittal of the police officers in Miami who killed, stomped to death a black insurance executive.
And are you telling me this is a deliberate conspiracy of the white establishment to subvert the processes of law and make sure there ain't no justice?
No, it isn't a deliberate conspiracy. It's letting know to those who enforce the laws that there are certain people whose life or death has little meaning.
Well, we have that in a smaller way in this country all the time. I mean, we have patent injustices. We see some people treated by the courts very delicately and other people chop. Now, are you suggesting that your country, well, let's leave it the States, that you are now ready for a revolution, that things are so bad that the blacks, the minorities, the oppressed should rise with arms and rend the Reagan government apart?
No, not at this moment. I think that a revolutionary process is underway in the United States. I can't speak for Canada because my knowledge is not that intense. But in the United States, certainly, if there's ever an amalgam between the poor whites, those who are being oppressed by the economic system now, and third world people, you might certainly have some form of a revolutionary process reach fruition. No country lasts forever. All countries have revolutionary concepts.
Oh, I agree. If things became so bad, if they started gas chambers in this country for whoever, or in the United States, you'd be entitled to take up arms and destroy these people who are doing that.
Yeah, but there are many people, Jack, many third world people who believe that they are in that type of situation.
Not in the States, sure.
Now, well, in the States, you look at the population of our jails. In Indian country, for example, it's primarily Native Americans. In urban areas, it's primarily blacks or Hispanics.
We've had the same problem here. Our jails have been filled with Indians until recently. Now we're adopting a slightly more civilized attitude towards it. Aren't we improving things?
Well,
we certainly are in this country.
Well, I can't talk about Canada. In the United States...
How about you, then?
In the United States, I think now there's sort of a holding ground at this moment. The system is afraid of confrontation. There aren't the energies available for confrontation as there were in the 60s at this moment. But it's sort of a holding pattern. We're going to see what the next year brings.
Too many people are too well off to risk on a revolution, including many of the minority people.
That may be, but there are great masses of third world people who are not well off at all. If you notice, our president says they can read the want ads and get jobs, and the want ads are for trained chemists, lawyers, accountants, executives, and most of the third world people don't have the quality education to even read those want ads.
You have some sympathy for Reagan when dear old Castro dumps all the people he doesn't want on the beaches in Florida?
Well, I thought that was kind of shrewd of Castro to get rid of all his misfits.
That's right.
And cleanse his country and dump them on the United States with its idiotic foreign policy toward Cuba.
Well, if Reagan took those and dumped them back again, you'd be claiming genocide.
Well, the point is that Reagan should open his doors to them. The treatment of the Haitian refugees, for example, has generated scores of lawsuits in the United States. People who are fleeing for one reason or another should be taken in. They take in the Cubans, but they don't take the Haitians in because they don't like Castro, but they like Duvalier.
And furthermore, Duvalier can't hit back at them, so they send them back.
Right, but he's apparently...
Okay, give me a 10-word description of Reagan and what lies ahead for the states under Reagan.
Well, Reagan is, I think, in my book anyway, a man without a brain. He is a man who uses the mellifluous tones of nonsense to keep a sort of power, but he doesn't run the country. No president ever ran the United States. It's run by commercial interests, which are enormous in concept. You look at our military budget now, it's going to major corporations.
One surely looks warmly back at Eisenhower when he said, I warn you against the dangers of control of the economy by the military-industrial complex.
That's right, and that was about the most sensible thing he ever said.
And we thought he was a little bit of a pea-brain.
Well, they thought he was senile at that moment because he said a workable and common-sense adage. But, of course, that's who does run the United States. Just look at the military budget.
Order, witness. Wait till your next question.
Okay.
After the break.
I subside.
William Kunstler, the famous radical, right? Famous radical lawyer from New York.
Well, Jack, people call me radical, but being an attorney is still part of the system. So I choose to say I represent radical people. Maybe my thoughts are radical, but as a sort of an officer of the court, I stay.
Is it not a fact, however, witness, that you subscribe to anarchist theories and probably are closest on the political spectrum to one of these Marxist-Leninist crazies groups?
Well, whether they're crazy or not, history will have to decide that. But I guess at heart, I'm sort of a playful anarchist. I like to see less government all the time because I think government is dangerous. On the other hand, I recognize someone has to deliver the mail and et cetera, so we need some or we'd kill each other. Yeah. So I subscribe to, as Jefferson said, a limited form of government.
In other words, like an extreme right-wing capitalist, you think the less government interference, the better?
Well, in some areas, the right and the left share common ground.
Of course they do. They're both arrogant, they're both arbitrary, and they're both anti-democratic.
Well, I don't know where we go that far. Without your adjectives, I'll agree to the proposition.
Why, Mr. Kunstler, are you in British Columbia at the moment? What is the secret reason?
Well, it's not so secret, Jack. I came up to be a witness for Dino Butler, who with his cousin Gary was tried for attempted murder and a number of other related crimes.
And they were convicted on a lesser charge.
On a lesser charge, even though they put no defense in whatsoever because the judge would not allow the pipe in the courtroom. Bibles are allowed for Christian folk, but not the Bible, not the pipe for Indian people. And the pipe has the same relationship in holiness to a Native American community that the Bible may have for a Roman Catholic or a Protestant.
But you're in Canada, and I would find it very hard to believe that a sacred pipe from south of the border would be acceptable as a form of oath in this jurisdiction.
Well, even if it wasn't a form of oath, and I would say to you that in the United States it is a form of oath in many courts. In fact, when I represented Dino Butler in a false accusation that he had murdered 2 FBI agents.
That was in North Dakota in 76.
South Dakota in 76, 75 when the murders occur. He was acquitted of that charge, but the pipe was on the table. People took the oath by the pipe, and that oath is solemn and creates perjury if you lie, just as if you do it on a white man's Bible. So I couldn't understand why that little gesture of allowing the pipe was forbidden here.
Well, I can see it. There are other ways you can take an oath. I believe you're allowed a solemn promise and declaration in these courts. I promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, as I answer to God in the great day of judgment. Well, that's religious.
But what's the difference if you held your pipe? But what's the difference if the pipe were in the courtroom?
Beside the point, they were convicted of lesser charges.
Lesser charges.
They did fire at policemen in this country.
Well, I don't know the facts of it all.
They were fined for that.
No, I understand that.
They were convicted for that.
But there was no defense, so you have no side of the story from them.
There was no defense because they fired the lawyer.
Well, they fired the lawyer because they thought the court was being arbitrary and unfair, and they weren't going to cooperate with such a system.
And they refused to talk.
And they refused to talk.
That's just like the old days of the IRA, refusing to recognize the jurisdiction of the court, refusing to talk. The judge says, enter a plea of not guilty, and may or may not find them guilty.
William Penn, the great Quaker who founded Pennsylvania, did exactly the same thing when he was tried for seditious libel for speaking on street corners in London.
Were you to be a witness in this case?
Yes, I was going to testify as to how the FBI, and up here probably working with the RCMP because there was a close working relationship, in the other trial, the murder of the FBI agents, worked out a system where the provocation of Indian people was done. I brought in, these are all false telegrams, which were sent out to indicate that AIM, the American Indian Movement, was going to kill a cop a day on Independence Day in 1976. And we got all of that before the jury. We had Clarence Kelly, then the FBI chief, testify before the jury. We had Frank Church, who headed the committee of the Congress, which found the FBI engaged in this kind of unethical practices. And I was going to testify also as to how Indian people have reacted to police officers, which is what happened here. The police weren't after these men for any crime.
They just forgot one thing, they were in a different country.
Well,
even if I were to accept that the FBI or the CIA or whatever set up a deliberate, what's the word you use, provocateur operation to goad people into or to frame them. That was in the States, it's not here.
Yeah, but that isn't even the claim here. The claim essentially would have been that Dino Butler and his cousin Gary had reason to fear police officers because this you can see the material in these telegrams, which was admitted in evidence and resulted in the acquittal of Dino for murder 4 or 5 years ago, shows this deliberate attempt to make both police officers and Indian people fear each other, and leads to these confrontations.
Well, I'm regretful that we are now adopting a Charter of Rights and a Constitution which seems to lean towards your system. Have you done any comparison of them?
Yeah, I was...
I hate to see mass murderers get off because the policeman erred, the murderer must go free, which seems to have been the case in many of your major decisions.
Well, that's what we call the exclusionary rule. If you get the evidence illegally, you can't use it. Your Bill of Rights modifies that and makes it sort of discretionary with the judge, that if he feels that the administration of justice would be impaired or impugned by admitting such evidence, he can exclude it. We have a rule that makes it automatically excludable if they get it illegally.
If you have, as we believe we have in the vast main, judges of integrity and honesty, surely they can make the decision whether or not the error of the constable is enough to allow a mass murderer to go free.
Well, Jack, you're assuming that judges are immune to their society, that they don't...
No, my record shows that I am not immune to any such thing. I don't make that assumption, but generally speaking, supposing... In fact, we had a case the other day. Let's take a moment for it. A man gets 4 years in the bucket for counterfeiting. On the Court of Appeal, it turns out that the warrant was only for wiretapping on drugs. They picked up the counterfeiting evidence without the specifics on the warrant. The 4 years is wiped out. The police came across good evidence on counterfeiting while looking for wiretapping.
But, Jack, this is the eternal conflict. The needs of law enforcement and the rights of individuals are always in conflict. There was a bill proposed here in Canada once to provide for universal wiretapping in a sort of warrantless type of legalized wiretapping. I think one of the debates was over whether you could bug the bedrooms and the boardrooms of the country.
Right.
And I took the position that was a bad bill in a debate on the bill at McGill University. And what you have is this conflict. Are you going to give up your rights to aid law enforcement? Is law and order going to be the touchstone of what you call a civilized society?
Reasonable interpretation of each circumstance is what I say is necessary.
Well, you know, we're going to lose the exclusionary rule in the United States. There's a congressional act now pending which knocks it out. I thought it was a great rule because it said to the police, if you can convict legally, go ahead. We're all for you. But if you're going to convict by breaking the Constitution, we're going to exclude that sort of evidence. Because once you let the barriers down, the police go wild. It's easier. If everybody was wiretapped, you'd solve most crimes.
And everybody had an identity card with a number and was linked to a computer. I agree. Give the police an inch more than is necessary and they'll use a foot.
Yeah.
I'll agree with that.
There's a danger, Jack, in living in our type of society, a democratic society. There's a danger, I understand, to law and order concepts. But there's also a danger if you go the other way. And I think that's a bigger danger.
One more segment. Sounds so reasonable. I wonder if he's really as reasonable as it sounds. I must take you at face value. Right?
I hope so.
After the break. I could spend a couple of days with this William Kunstler. Fascinating guy. Give me a paragraph of background on your being chief negotiator at Wounded Knee when the battle took place.
Well, I replaced the original chief negotiator and spent a lot of time at the Knee trying to reach a solution. It was finally reached in May of '73 when people stacked their arms and walked out. It was an amazing history for me. I learned more about myself and about Native people than I had ever known before.
Justified resistance by the Wounded Knee Indians?
Well, they didn't really resist. What they did was they took over a symbolic town, which had been a tourist paradise for the white community.
That was the place where the slaughter took place by the cavalry.
In 1890, 300 people were just massacred. Bigfoot's Minneconjou Sioux were massacred and buried in a common grave.
You Americans have a horrible background, don't you?
What we have done to Native people, I think, is beyond belief. The use of alcohol.
If we did it, we did it much more quietly.
Well, the British have always been able to
Canadians and British.
I know the Canadian, but I'm talking back to the British origins of imperialism. They've always been able to push imperialism with a sort of velvet glove approach, but underneath has always been the hard mail of coercion.
Just as brutal as the Yankee imperialist system.
No different. We learned our lesson at the master's knee.
Attica, 43 dead. You were at the jail and you had also defended them.
I represented all 1,200 inmates who had rebelled. They called for me, I flew in there, and I was there for those 4 horrible days, ending up with this massacre that took place.
You saw the massacre?
I was outside the wall when the massacre occurred. I could hear the guns, and I knew that a lot of people were dying. I could hear the screams. I heard the helicopters flying overhead, and I smelt the gas, which is what drove me away from the prison.
Describe Rockefeller's part in that in a sentence.
Rockefeller's part was not coming to the prison. If he had come to the prison, as another governor did with me, Governor Cahill of New Jersey, just 2 or 3 years later at Woodbridge, there would have been no deaths. It would have been a peaceful situation. But he refused to come. He was too arrogant to bend his head and come to that prison.
Not gutless, just tough in his mind.
Well, his daughter once told me at a dinner party that he was afraid to go in the yard, they would kill him. They didn't want him in the yard. They wanted him over a loudspeaker on a television screen to say, I will agree to these demands.
Remember when the Black Panthers were being wiped out? Was that a police conspiracy, a deliberate plan to slaughter?
Oh, no question about it. The Church Committee found that the FBI set one group against another, sending letters to one, the others out to get you, sending letters to the other containing the same information, and 19 deaths occurred just through that mechanism.
But you would agree that the mindless weathermen have to be kept under control because of their IRA-style behavior.
Yeah, Jack, they were never mindless. They were young people who thought the system was rotten and finally came to the conclusion that only violence would solve that. I might disagree with their end result, but they were never mindless people. The Kathy Boudins, the Bernadine Dorans were always people of coming right out of the middle class, coming out of the best educated people.
I can understand the black, the underprivileged, but the Patsy, what's her name, Patty Hearst or Boudin's there.
Well, put Patty Hearst out of this picture. She doesn't merit to be included in this group.
She doesn't. The Boudin, is she from a wealthy background?
Well, her father is one of the leading constitutional lawyers in the United States, Leonard Boudin, and a colleague of mine for many years. And she comes right out of what I call the upper middle class, just as all revolutionary concepts, Jack, don't come out of the people struggling in the lower echelons. They come out of people like Robespierre, Litvinov, Lenin, and so on. They come out of the intelligentsia.
Chicago riots.
Well, we call them, well, they were riots, police riots.
Chicago rebellion, you say?
Well, rebellion on the part of those who were being beaten, but riots on the part of the police, as the commission, the President's Commission found. We won that case. They all were acquitted of conspiracy. And it was a very important case, probably one of the most important ones in American political jurisprudence.
Have you ever won any cases, some of the things we've covered, whereby those who conspired or arranged it were brought to justice and punished?
Never. There has never been a situation where anybody in authority has ever been punished for the real violence in our society.
But yet you have a fairly brutal society at times. You take a guy like Nixon and you pamper him and let him resign. But in the meanwhile, he was pretty thoroughly destroyed and discredited as a venal, dreadful president.
Can I tell you something, Jack? If he ran today, he'd take a sizable proportion of the vote. Remember, he was our representative to Sadat's funeral. He was sent as a representative of the United States. He's made millions through his books and television.
Isn't that repulsive?
Of course it's repulsive, but the real ones who create these situations always get off. It's only the poor blacks and Chicanos and American Indians, Native Americans who are shot down in the streets. And that's why no one, or if they're not, they're prosecuted.
Mm-hmm. Now you're going on 64. Have you amassed one of these Melvin Belli type fortunes, or have you been working for pin money?
No, my modus operandi has been not to charge. In every case I can get away without charging. When I need a shekel or two to pay the rent, then I have to charge or make a speaking appearance or write a book or what have you. But I've learned to adopt skills to my needs. And while I never have any money, at least I have a currency and an interesting and active life, doing what I hope is productive and I hope is important.
Well, I'll tell you now on one of my final questions. God bless Joan Baez for changing her side in the Vietnam War and pointing out that the North Vietnamese, just as brutal and cruel and torturous as the American imperialists in Vietnam?
Well, she was talking more about it, the Vietnamese in Cambodia. She was totally discredited. Time magazine did a survey in Cambodia and found that it wasn't the North Vietnamese who were starving people or the North Vietnamese who were keeping food. In fact, they were promoting it. Baez was totally discredited. Most of the movement people she wanted to sign her great letter of protest refused to do so on that ground.
Is the movement, the great revolutionary rebellious movement, with all its Hoffmans and everybody else, is that dead? No more young leaders, except for maybe the American Indian movement?
Well, Jack, no revolutionary concept is ever dead. Circumstances, history brings movements into being. And I think now we're in a waiting period. People are waiting to see what the next year, what the next 2 years brings.
Do you think democracy and make it the United States can survive?
Well, I don't really think there is anything like democracy. We vote for people who are selected for us.
What would you call it now if it's not the great United States, a land of the free? Bring us your starving, bring us your this homeless. Is it not the great democracy?
What it is a commercial corporate state which poses as a democracy and lets people feel the illusion that they select their leaders when in fact they do not.
Fascinated.
Jack, you're about to explode. I can see
No,
that.
I'm not. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I used to be a bit of a revolutionary myself, but now, same age as you, I'm settled and moving to the right.
But given the right stimuli.
Given the right reason.
Like these tax revolt you were talking about in the upper middle class, given the right reasons, you know, that's no different than the American Revolution.
I'll rebel.
Everyone would rebel.
William Kunstler and John Trudell, who's from the American Indian movement, or the Society of the People Struggling to Be Free. If I were in town tonight, or if I'm in town tonight, I'm coming to hear you. 7:30 tonight at the Fisherman's Hall, 138 East Cordova. Oh, they all call me Homer Stevens, used to be a great friend of mine, but I hope he's there tonight. The Fisherman's Hall, now a very respectable union, always has been. 7:30 tonight to hear the incredible Kunstler and John Trudell, who's probably just as good, is he?
John Trudell is a great speaker and has suffered immense tragedy. His family was wiped out, and he is a man without a family. They were burnt out. Everyone killed, I think, except his father-in-law.
Where?
This was on the reservation a year or so ago.
That was
It was
not
a horrible tragedy.
You mean burnt out by an accident?
Well, who knows? Who knows?
You live with conspiracies.
Well, conspiracies are part of...
A couple of months ago, reporter Steve Wyatt was up in Westbank and did a fascinating little report about the highly successful operation by the Westbank Indian Band of a number of mobile home sites. Ron Derrickson is the chief of the band. There was some trouble at the time because Mr. Derrickson was being a little bit tough with some of his non-Indian tenants. Water had been cut off in one place, a great jurisdictional battle as ever with the rentalsmen and whatnot. And now Mr. Derrickson is under some attack by apparently some proportion of his band headed by one Ben Abel. Ron, thanks for coming in this morning, first of all.
You're welcome.
And you seem to have run this band highly successfully from a financial point of view, but a basic question, do you own the land or does the band own the land?
Well, all the land belongs to Her Majesty the Queen under the Indian Act. The BNA Act makes that quite clear where title of the land is vested. But in our band, 80% of the land is owned by the locatees, which are our band members. The balance of the land is owned by the band, and it's quite a free society. The rules are pretty free in interchanging land from one band member to another, or the band. You know, since I've been chief, the band has bought a lot of property from band members.
Does that mean that you personally own a lot of the land in your own name?
I personally have some land, yes.
And what about the band members? When you own in the original reserve for the right of the Queen, is it allocated to each Indian member, head of a family, or is it allocated to the band as a whole?
Well, our band was only created in 1952. We used to be part of the Vernon Indian Band, and we broke away because we couldn't get representation for our interests there. Even before that, if you wanted a piece of land, basically you went out and you fenced it and you laid claim to it. And, you know, and at one time Indians didn't claim ownership of land. It was owned by, everything was owned by everybody. You white people have imposed that rule of self-ownership and, you know, this is mine and don't touch mine. Unfortunately, we have to live by your rules or we can't exist. So this is the reason that we have individual ownership. I mean, we're a capitalist band. It's a capitalist country, and we have to exist the same as you do, so that's why we do it.
No knocking from me. In fact, I hope I'm not guilty of inverted, patronizing attitude of some kind, because I said to Steve, hey, Ron's got a Mercedes-Benz. Does he own it or does the band own it?
Well, I mean, it's the same thing I could say to you, Jack. Gee, it's good for you as an immigrant to this country to come and make good, and even a Scotchman at that. You know, I could use, that same parallel. The fact isn't because I'm Indian. Maybe it's newsworthy.
Because you are an Indian.
Because I'm an Indian and have done well. But not only have I was financially well off before I became chief. I didn't need the job. The band needed me to do the job.
So, and you're not ashamed of any wealth you've collected as an Indian chief?
I will not apologize to the white society or to the native society that I have done well financially.
Now, I'm not being nosy in this time. Honestly, I'm not. I'm just trying to understand. In the operation, do you run a corporate structure for the benefit of the whole band, or is some for the benefit of the band and some for the benefit of yourself?
We run several corporate structures that are for the benefit of the whole band. In fact, the band as a whole creates more revenue than any one single band member.
It does?
Oh, yes.
Now, those inactive band members who still have title and are not taking part in your operation, do they benefit?
Well, my job as chief and the council's job when we're elected is to represent the interest of the individual landowners and the locatees of the band members. And several band members, I could name 24 since I've been elected, have now don't have to worry about where their income is coming. They've got sufficient income to live, I mean, in the upper middle class area.
Why not?
That's right. Several of them are worth more money than I am. They just haven't realized it yet.
Could they sell that land to a white man if they wanted to?
No, and nor should they.
No, they couldn't do that anyway.
Oh, there's always a way. If you want to do anything, that's why we're successful in Westbank. Because the saying in our office is, if you say can't, you can't work here.
Now, how many in your band?
There's 207 people.
I'm going to ask you in a moment what has been done for the band, because you've many things to tell me. Are any on federal Indian welfare?
Oh, sure. About 5 to 6. Sometimes in the off season we run as high as 15%. But generally, we have 5% of our band members on welfare.
And you don't mind they don't mind taking welfare, even if they might have technical wealth in the band?
Let me restate that question. We have 5% of the residents of our reserve on welfare, not 5% of our Indian people on welfare. And there's 4,800 residents on our reserve.
I'm glad you did. No Indians on welfare?
Pardon?
No Indians on welfare?
The month before last, we had 2.
Now, what have you done? What has the band done under you to improve living conditions for the Indians themselves in this acreage?
We've probably built more housing per capita than any band in Canada. I mean, in the last year and a half alone, 24 new housing units. 24 new housing. CMHC approved.
Can an Indian buy them from you at cost?
Well, they're on a low-income basis. The money's borrowed from CMHC. There's been talk and rumors around that I'm spending revenue funds from the band. You know, the truth of the fact is that the band general revenues, since I've been chief, which is 5.5 years, we've never spent 1 single cent of our revenue. We've just built them up.
And what would your band be worth now?
Oh, we can pay our bills.
No, I mean, it's obviously a multi-million-dollar operation. I'm not knocking you. Worth millions.
Well, it depends what you've taken as a value. If you were to look at all our land and all our investments, it would be several $100 million. But I mean, it's not stuff you can cash.
No, I understand that. More with Ron Derrickson, the chief of the Westbank Band, successful and pleasured Indian capitalist, right?
Right.
After the break.
I know that.
Ron Derrickson, chief of the Westbank Band. Now, let's turn to the problems. Oh, how many mobile home parks have you got on there?
There's 17 mobile home parks.
How many tenants do you have?
About 1,200.
Are you putting them through?
Putting them through, you mean the ringer?
Yeah.
No, I wish we were. I wish we were able to. You know, in any business that you operate, it has to be competitive. You know, we don't have the only trailer parks in the valley. And if we're not competitive, we're the same or lower than other trailer parks.
Even with your increases?
Even with our increases.
Have you got jurisdiction for everything, or is the rentals man sticking his nose into your field?
Well, the decision in the Supreme Court of BC has been reserved on that issue, and we'll see.
I felt kind of sorry when Steve did the program for some of the old white people, and they felt they had no security of tenure, that at least one or two were going to be turfed out, water cut off, etc.
Well, two were evicted, but you know, we retain the same rights as the developers or owners of apartments in Vancouver, that if we have a tenant in our trailer park, and if there are bad tenants, they don't obey the rules and they cause problems, we have the right to evict them.
And you allow them the same machinery that we have down here?
Well, yes. Well, no. We allow them the same reasonableness. You know, you have to be reasonable if you impose any rules or regulations, or people, well, you know, they'll go away and they won't come back, and we'll be out of business. But the fact is that that's not the issue. Two people were evicted because they weren't good tenants. They didn't obey the regulations of the park. In 5.5 years, 2 people have been evicted. That doesn't sound to me like the Indian Band is throwing out 4,000
people. How many tenants have you got altogether?
We've got 1,200 people living in, or 1,200 units on the reserve. I guess that amounts to about 4,000 people.
Yeah, about 4,000 people. Okay, next one. Ben Abel. Dale Hicks was up interviewing Ben Abel, and I get the message. He's a member of the band.
Yes, he is.
Asking for an investigation into the expenditure of band funds and demanding suspension of the chief and council. Did he substantiate any charges? What were the charges he made against you?
That I was using band funds illegally, that I own several houses. You know, he said in his interview that I own 5 houses. Well, I own several more houses than that, but that's my business. It's not band money. A federal investigation was done on our council, and our books were given to them. It took 6 months to do. The Department of Indian Affairs ordered the audit done. It was an investigative audit. Not one single penny was missing.
So what do you say briefly to Abel?
He's an idiot.
He's not, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
He doesn't have a clue.
As far as this is concerned.
He doesn't have a clue.
And you would welcome any investigation at any time?
Our doors are open, our file doors are open. I said to the Mobile Homeowners Association too, that anybody wants to see where our financial resources are coming from and how they're spent, bring an auditor, we'll allow them. If they're wrong, they pay. If we're wrong, we pay.
Next question. You're getting a 1982 Mercedes-Benz?
No, they're not as good as the 450, the new 380s.
My thanks to Ron Derrickson. My thanks to Ron Derrickson. Brief interview now with an NDP MP who's been squeezed to the end. I hate to do the Johnny Carson thing, but it's all I could do this morning after the break. I'm not quite finished yet with Ron Derrickson. Ron, what about the leases on these mobile home parks?
Well, as you know, our position in court is that none of the tenants have the legal right to be there. We have, even before the court date was set, has developed what we call a 5-year licensing agreement. And each year the rent is reviewed in that agreement based on the BC Consumer Price Index. Mm-hmm. So you know what your rents are going to be. It's tied to inflation, and it should give security to the non-Indian resident on the reserve.
On a 5-year lease agreement?
That's right.
And the increases are related directly to the CPI?
No, not the Canadian, on the BC Consumer Price Index.
But of course, you have no mortgages in any of these parks, I presume?
Pardon?
You don't have any big mortgages?
Oh, definitely. Some very, very heavy. There's millions of dollars in mortgages on these parks.
So therefore, apart from your BC Consumer Price Index, or refinancing at high interest rates would also bring increases for the tenants in your 17 mobile home parks?
Most of the parks are financed over the period of the lease.
They are,
yes.
Now, what about the grants from the provincial government for creating mobile home parks. Are you able to qualify as an Indian band for that?
No, we're not. And it's interesting to say that Van der Zam wrote me a letter, told him, you know, in his letter, he said that this is a federal responsibility. It's under their jurisdiction, and he doesn't ask them for money, so why should I ask him? But they do take the tax base off our reserve. They tax each operator, they tax each resident, and they return nothing in services. What we're getting is taxation without representation.
Just a minute. You pay taxes on your mobile home
You
parks?
darn rights we do.
Normal provincial taxes?
The same as you would if you owned it.
And what services you get?
Nothing.
Fire protection?
We pay for our fire protection over and above that.
Policing you get?
That's a federal responsibility.
On an Indian reserve?
That's right.
It's not the provincial
No,
responsibility whatsoever?
It's paid for by the federal government. Same as schooling. It's paid for by the federal government.
Do you have schools in your own reserves?
No.
They go to the local schools,
right.
and the federal government picks up the...
Yeah, $2,700 per student.
$2,700 per student. And on the other hand, the provincial government wants to keep you under the jurisdiction of the provincial rent control operations.
That's right, but they won't recognize us as a legal level of government. They won't give us the grants, but they take the money out.
Do you have any members of the band, and this is a blind question in the dark, who are complaining that they have been deprived of their title because of the corporate structures of the band?
Oh, sure, we all complain. Every one of them that goes into it complains, but it's the only way you can get financing. I mean, we have to start somewhere, and through a corporate veil is the only way you can create your financing.
No, but I'm saying every member got a piece of land to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Is one Indian able to buy land from another Indian?
Oh, yes.
Right. Much land do you own?
I own a good portion.
By far the most of any Indian?
No, oh no. Maybe about 25 other Indians own more land than I do.
And you feel that the other members of the band are getting a fair deal, and if they've got any complaints about it, and there's an investigation, if it fails, they pay, and if they win, you pay?
You know, we have general band meetings. If you got a complaint, bring it to a general band meeting and have it heard there. By running a petition to the press, this whole petition issue with Ben Abel was what was created by the Mobile Homeowners Association. Now, they took a person that didn't understand basic business, basic anything, and they used him. You know, and that's a good case of the white man using an Indian.
Well, you know what you're doing, and you're going to keep them in the place within the law.
Yes, but we're not going to, we need the non-Indian resident on our reserve. I mean,
welcome them.
Sure we do, and we've treated them fairly, and I defy anybody to say how they've been treated unfairly.
When are you going to put a golf course in the reserve?
Next year.
Now, sir, I do apologize. Your name is Mr. Blakey.
Right.
And your first name is?
Bill.
And you are an NDP MP?
From Winnipeg.
From Winnipeg?
Yes.
And you're in town for a specific purpose?
Yes, I'm in town to speak at the third annual Vancouver Kingsway NDP Burns dinner tomorrow night.
Oh, what some poor the gifty gears to see ourselves as other seers. How long have you been that? Was that wee fella Waddle?
Yes, I was elected at the same time as Ian Waddle, or Waddell, as we call him in Ottawa.
No, it's Waddle. Now, don't forget that. It's Waddle. Waddell is a fancy snob.
I see.
Anglicized pronunciation.
I see. Well, I'll call him
Waddle.
Ian Waddle.
Ian Waddle. That's what his mother called him, Waddle. I was speaking my ethnic tongue.
I noticed.
Now, which constituency are you from?
Winnipeg, Birds Hill.
Winnipeg what?
Winnipeg, Birds Hill, which is sort of northeast suburban Winnipeg riding.
Did you see that wonderful story in the Globe this morning that Schreier was thinking about forcing an election because he didn't like what Trudeau was doing with the Constitution?
Yeah, I just was reading it in the Vancouver paper here this morning.
Quite incredible. I always had the feeling that Trudeau and Schreier were very close together, and that, you know, they're both really NDPers, aren't they?
I don't think that Mr. Trudeau is an NDPer. No,
God, you people have been in bed with him long enough to turn him into one.
If he's he's a strange NDPer if he is an NDPer, because he's allowed more foreign control over our economy than I can.
What's your area of expertise?
Any NDP government
Mr.
doing.
Blakey?
I'm the health critic for the NDP.
Oh dear.
Federal caucus.
What do you think is going to happen to McKechnie's budget on the reduction of the block grants to the provincial governments?
Well, I hope that Mr. McEachen will think twice about his proposed cutbacks in the transfer payments, because I think that it's going to hurt healthcare and education in all the provinces, but it's particularly going to hurt Medicare in those provinces like Ontario and Alberta, for instance, where the governments are sort of hostile to the idea of Medicare anyway, and between those governments, particularly progressive conservative governments, and the doctors, they're going to use this context that Mr. McEachen has carelessly set up to erode Medicare.
Extra billing would be an absolute scandal. I suppose you agree with me on that.
I do. I think extra billing should be banned right across the country.
I don't hear any, I don't see that many doctors suffering.
No, I don't think so at all.
Maybe not doing as well as Ron, but they're none of them suffering, I don't think. When's the Waddles party for Rabbie?
It's tomorrow night at 7:30, and those who are interested can contact the Vancouver Kingsway constituency office.
Where is it?
I meant to bring the address with me and don't have it with me, but they can call the Vancouver Kingsway constituency office.
Sorry it squeezed you down, but thanks very much. Don't go away for a moment. I'll be back after break. Busy week next week. We'll have more on the treatment of the mentally ill youngsters in jails and around the province. That's one thing for sure. In fact, Dr. John Gossage will be here Monday morning, as will Dr. Peterson, isn't it? The head man at SFU, with all this kerfuffle about losing their football players. Big deal. I'm heartbroken. See you Monday morning at 9 a.m. Touchdown, precisely. You were 6 when you left him?
Yeah,
And
first time.
How many foster homes have you been in since?
42.
How many?
Well, now 43.
43. Where does British Columbia stand on a scale of 1 to 10 as to how it's been coping with severely emotionally disturbed children, with or without delinquencies, and perhaps with diseases of the mind? And on a scale of 1 to 10, Jamie?
1.5.
Liz?
I don't know that even on the scale.
No, a 1 at maximum.
He's got that power surging through his veins. You're going to have to, his 2 hands are going to be on the door sills at 24 Sussex Drive when the time comes. You have to pry his hands off the door sills to get him out. He's not going to resign.
Jack, this is the eternal conflict. The needs of law enforcement and the rights of individuals are always in conflict.